I'm Sal Marino, host of the One Pour Problems podcast, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Bryn Tindall, the founder and CEO of Rebellion Group. Bryn, super excited to have you on the show today.
Thank you for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bryn and I got connected because his organization is doing a lot of really cool things, within the state and helping try to bring a bunch of people together to continue to push Connecticut forward. And it formed this, kind of partnership where we're starting to do a little bit more things together. And I think with a mutual culture, that's kind of what set us, on this path. Yep. But Bryn, would love to, have you introduce yourself and just kind of tell the audience who you are and a little bit about your background.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. Thank you again for the opportunity. Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I started what was Rebel Interactive about 11 years ago. We recently rebranded to the Rebellion Group. We've broken out a few of the businesses that were kind of hidden underneath that. There's Virtuoso, which is the business strategy side of the company. There's Rebel, which is the sort of the boutique production arm. And then we launched a new venture that we're calling 535, which is think of like a skunkworks R&D. A lot of the development, a lot of the SaaS products that we're building, a lot of the AI applications that we're building are coming out of that group. That's
cool. Mm-hmm. So what got you your start into the marketing side of the world?
Sure. So I went to Amherst College. I'm from Colorado, as I mentioned, and I went to Amherst College. And if you go to a school like that, most people become doctors, lawyers, or they work on Wall Street. And I can't stand blood, and I don't really like lawyers, so that gave me one option, right? And so although I'm married to one, right? So I have to strike that. But
we're gonna have to cut that one out,
right? So I started taking the trips down to Wall Street to meet with all these companies, trying to decide what I'm going to do after school. And on the way back from New York, I had scheduled an interview in South Norwalk, Connecticut, with this boutique agency called Modem Media. Not knowing anything about it, it just sounded kind of interesting, and so I went in and took this interview. It turns out this was a company that was formed in 1986. It's hard to go back in time and remember pre-digital, but there was a time, right? And these guys had set themselves up as the world's first digital ad agency, so pre-digital, right? And so they were describing the kind of stuff they were doing. And an example is, they would take JCPenney's catalog, kind of dating that already. I don't even JCPenney's around anymore, but
right. Yep.
And they were putting it on a CD-ROM, right? And so moving it from print to digital, right?
Yeah.
They were building out. If you remember the online store Prodigy, this was back in the day. It was American AOL, Prodigy. I think it was called CompuServe. These were the ways you got on the internet. So Prodigy was one of the primary ones, and they built the world's first e-commerce engines and put merchants in there. So they were describing this world to me, and I was like, this sounds amazing, right? And again, pre-digital, pre-email, pre-web, all that kind of stuff. So I decided to take this job, and about 6 months into the job, the web hit, right? And so here's these guys called Modem Media, and everybody's getting on the internet with modems, and they looked like they were just brilliant, right? Yep. And everybody had to have a website. You may not be old enough to remember this, but everybody had to have a website, and everybody had to have it right away, and it was just the absolute wild, wild west at that time. You could name your price, and you just nobody knew what they were doing. You were just figuring it out as you went, right?
Yeah,
it was a crazy time. So that's how I got my start in this. So going all the way back, I feel like I was at the very foundational level of the beginnings of digital.
Huh. Yeah. That's really cool. Yeah. So you mentioned Colorado. You had us bring on the Breckenridge Bourbon here. So right. As we normally do on this show is we share some conversation over drinks. Okay. So would love to kind of hear your story. I'll pour this for us and kind of tell us, why is this Breckenridge something that, was important to you?
Yeah. I come from a very large family. I have 11 brothers and sisters. I grew up in Colorado, as I mentioned, and made my way out this way, and eventually moved my mom out this way for many years. And towards the end of the cycle of the last couple of years ago, we decided to move my mom back to Colorado, which is where the majority of the family is, because a lot of the kids on this side of the states are aged out kind of thing. Mm-hmm. So I was thinking, what would be a kind of a cool story. So, I remember just before we sort of packed her up and started to send her back to the other side, we sat down outside my house and around a fire pit, and I poured her her first bourbon.
Yeah.
It's a Breckenridge bourbon because she's a Colorado girl too, right? Mm-hmm. And it was fun. We were just sitting there. We were listening to music, and I remember, like Hotel California came on, and I was explaining to her, it's just one of those great conversations as we're sipping bourbon. I was explaining to her that it isn't about really a hotel, and and so each song we kind of like talking it through, and so
Yep.
it's just a nice moment, to have had with my mom before we sort of put it back on the side. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well,
Thank
cheers.
you. Yeah, cheers.
Appreciate you being here.
Yeah, thank you again.
So I think for me, honestly, the biggest reason why we do this is I feel like a lot of relationships in my world have kind of formed around like experiences, and like one of those for me was specifically like around bourbon. Like I've mentioned it before in the show that like my start into Charles IT was founded off of a bourbon tasting, where I learned about the job and ended up having a conversation, and now fast forward, here we are.
Yeah.
But I love that it can like create these special moments, right? And it doesn't have to be specifically about the drink, but these moments where you're talking about different songs and you're walking through that, and like you get these cool moments. So for me, it's been kind of the opener for most of my relationships, and that's why it's so significant.
Yeah,
so
yeah,
I love the story, and I do love Breckenridge. So
Cool.
this is great.
Well, Breck, as it's said now. Yeah,
Breck.
They've shortened themselves
That's true.
to Breck. Yeah.
Breck.
So.
That's right. I'll be waiting for the update on the bottle.
Okay. Yeah, right.
So we talked a little bit about obviously your background and specifically in the marketing side. Today we're talking about like how do we actually form a marketing plan, a marketing culture. Like how do we build all that stuff out without breaking the bank, right? A lot of organizations think that they have to invest a ton of money into marketing to like get any type of returns. But I think there's more to that story, and it comes down to like your process and the things that you're doing that actually make an impact. So, if I were to say, I need your help, I have no marketing right now, what would be some of the things that you would recommend, like right off the bat, these are the first things that you should do?
It depends by industry, depends by types of category, there's a lot of variables there, right? But if you think about what's been going on with respect to how Google has changed with respect to privacy and all the stuff that's going on, paid advertising, which has been the go-to for most people in terms of lead gen for quite some time, does not perform the way that it did. It's gotten increasingly expensive, so you can't just rely on sort of paid advertising. I recognize in this state, everybody thinks that, especially if you're a lawyer, that billboards are the way to go. If you have any sense of what those cost, you have to really generate a lot of revenue to cover that stuff. Yeah. So, you would argue that it's a brand play, but again, that can boomerang on you. I found, so when you talk about doing it on a shoestring and trying to be the most effective with what you're doing, I think the first thing I always focus on is who are those people in my community, my ecosystem, or another word I use is sphere of influence. Who in my sphere of influence is connected to the types of people that I most ideally want to be working with, right? And so identifying them first, and then beginning to set them up in such a way that they understand who I am, what I do, what works for me, and so forth. It's a little bit like, sort of friend formation. If you think about with friends, you can't, with a good friendship, just sort of say hello once in a while, which is what a lot of people do, and then they disappear. Yep. When you set up referral partners or you set up a network like this, same thing, you'll see people set it up and then they say, yeah, they even sign agreements and so forth, and they disappear. Yeah. This truly requires cultivation. Mm-hmm. And you have to work it like it's a real customer, like a real relationship. Yeah. Much of that process I found is just educating them up, making sure they understand, and giving them reasons for you to stay top of mind, because they're busy, all of these folks too. Mm-hmm. And so what you have to try to do is figure out things that are of interest to them that will help keep you in the top of their mind as they go through their journey. We do a lot of different things to sort of grow the business, but when you boil it down in terms of what's the most important referral source for my type of business, it's people that are connected to the end customer, which is where we put a lot of focus on.
Yeah, and I love that you start there, right? Because you could have very easily said, start posting on social media, get your constant contact up and running, and go do those things that are like what people assume is like the baseline of their marketing, but really, you're talking about referral partners and relationship building.
Yeah, and it's a long road. You have to, as I mentioned, so email, right? I built an email marketing company going all the way back to the early 90s, right? And email used to play a much more significant role in lead gen than it does today. Mm-hmm. Much of the email, and I'm not talking about AI-powered email, which is of recent vintage, but most of the email just goes in and out. It's basically become just a brand extension now, very similar to the billboards I was talking about. Yeah. If you're looking at your email to generate leads and for people to respond the way that it worked early in the genesis of it, that those days are over.
Yeah. So you mentioned the billboards, mm-hmm. right? Like, I would say if you were to pick out one person that you see on a billboard, who's the one that first comes to mind?
Well, I mean, come on, in this area, right? The golf billboards, yep. I hate them. I literally don't know a single person mm-hmm. that likes them.
Yep.
And yet, I don't know the backstory. I would love to know the backstory. Yeah. Because either somebody is funding that or it's really working. But when you talk to just about everybody, they roll their eyes and say, I would never do business with that person.
Yeah.
And so it's an interesting story. But what's happened is all the other law firms throughout the state have followed suit. If you drive up and down 9184, 85-90% of the billboards are related to this topic. What it's done is it's driven up the cost of billboards, right? Good luck trying to get in an inventory of any sort, especially the ones that are non-digital, because what's been happening right now. So I'm not saying there's not a place for billboards. It has mm-hmm. to be in your mix for sure, especially if you're a consumer brand. But that's not the type of thing that you stand up a billboard and then sit back and wait for the phone to ring.
Roll in.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. It's funny because that's, we went through that same process at Charles IT, like going through billboards and figuring out, like, is that something that we look to potentially mm-hmm. put onto like our strategic plan? And after going through that process, like, you're not wrong. The cost of a billboard mm-hmm. is like astronomical. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, well, how do I even justify the return? You're like, the chances of somebody who's like, my IT is down today and it happens to be driving by our billboard and that's where they think of us, I'm like, it's so slim, right? Yeah. It's really brand awareness.
Yeah. Well, you're not a consumer brand, right?
Exactly.
If you were a consumer brand like the beverage we're drinking, I think that might be a different story. You need to, mm-hmm. you need multiple touches to get in people's mind's eye.
Yep.
You need to get closer to the buyer, which is what I was describing with your mm-hmm. brand, right? You've got to get your brand has to be positioned, especially with what you do, because your type of purchase is you have to catch the customer at just the right moment. They're either brand new, setting up a shop like you're doing here, or they've just had a pain point that makes them feel like it's time for a change. Yours is a really interesting sales cycle that way. Yep. So those two moments, what's the likelihood that you would put up a billboard, someone would drove by and happen to be, it's really low if you mm-hmm. think about it, right? Yeah. So that's why in your case, you have to create multiple touch points, to these audiences that I'm talking about and continuously nurture it so that when the moment hits, they remember that this is where they should be calling. Right?
Yeah, for sure. So you talk about brand a bunch, right? And I think one of the most prominent things about the Rebellion Group is like your brand and specifically like your culture. Mm-hmm. You are probably one of the few organizations that I would say your culture is so similar to ours. And we were talking before we started here just about the event that you guys have going mm-hmm. on today and the video that you guys put up. And I'm like, it's a mirror image of mm-hmm. what the culture is. So like, how do you build that, like that brand awareness and specifically on social media, try to draw in clients, but also try to use that to bring in talent?
Yes, I want to back up just a little bit because pre-COVID, we could not get people to leave Rebel. We had built such a wonderful culture, and then post-COVID, as you may remember, the marketplace just absolutely accelerated like crazy, right?
Yep.
The types of things that we do became really, really in demand. And the ability to work anywhere at any point, just absolutely altered the landscape, right? And so mm-hmm. there was a window in time post-COVID, we really struggled with poaching. We could not hang on to people. and you keep losing key people, you talk about culture, it's really difficult to replicate that. And when I say leaving, and I have an example of someone who was in my sales team and making a good amount of money, but somebody overseas saw his resume and decided to throw another 100,000 on top of it, and say work from your apartment and run sales. And you just look at that on paper, not qualified. Yep. But it doesn't matter. Right? It was the crazy time, right? So I'm answering this question in a long way, because this was a very difficult time for us, because all the things we held near and dear of what it meant to be a rebel, because we very, very carefully hand select the type of people we invite into the environment. And yet, even when we did that, we could not hold on to the talent. And so it was really, really tricky. And so you add to that there's some generational stuff in there too.
Oh yeah. Yep.
We raised, a whole generation because of COVID who felt that, working from home was their right. And how dare you ask me to come in, and then, the companies that were trying to go against that got skewered out in the media for a little while, you may remember. And so then they just stopped talking about it. Right. And so there was this little window in time, where the employee got to dictate the terms in industries like mine, and that does not help with culture, right? So I wanted to have that backdrop. So we really doubled down on trying to circle the wagons with the key leadership and get that really close to the fiber of what it meant to be what we call a rebel, right? Yep. And then slowly begin to build out from there. And so I'm not going to say we've solved this, because we haven't, but because this, and I'm sure you're facing this too, because of the type of stuff that you guys do and the in-demand nature of the skill sets. But what's also changed, of course, is the labor market has slowed down. Remote working is no longer as cool. It's drying up. Oh, you saw the other day that Amazon basically said 5 days in the office. And the more that these folks hear this story, the more they realize that that it is a contracting universe, the remote work, right? Yeah. I am adamant that we are an in-office company. Yep. And the reason I say that to you is when I started my first company back in 1997, I was one of the original people allowing people to work remote way back when. I remember going into a customer, and on my early on my business card was our P.O. boxes. I didn't have a physical address. Handed over the card, and the guy put it back across the table and was like, "Sorry, we don't do business with companies that don't have a building." And I'm like, "Okay,
yep.
All right."
Interesting, right?
Fast forward, right, and just think how that's shifted culturally, right, especially during the apex of this. So, what we've tried to do is, against some people's desire, is get them in the office as much as possible, because I don't think, especially with the type of business that we have and the speed with which stuff moves today, that working from your apartment, you can be on message, on brand, work collaboratively, learn at the pace that that is required in this type of business. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure. I'm talking to myself right now. Like, literally, right? I'm in the mirror, and I'm like, this is exactly the same problem, because, like, yes, if you were to say, our spaces are, I would consider like parallel, right? Like we both work in like a digital environment and can both very capably work remotely to like physically do the job, right? But there's something that gets lost in translation when you're not together and you're not collaborating and you're not, bringing everybody together.
I had a call this morning with a large client of ours, and he was talking about a social post. And he was talking about he had relayed this information to this person on my team, and yet the post went up. And how is that possible? Well, the answer was this particular person didn't relay it, went on vacation, got sick, got lost. But it's to your point about the minutia of the detail. It matters. Yep. It matters that detail did not make its way to what was put out publicly, right? Yep. And the other thing I would say that's happened with customers and people post-COVID, I know this is going to sound like a gross stereotype, but the anxiety level of business people post-COVID has substantively shifted. And the way I would best describe it is, you can have someone at a high, and then you'll see them yo-yo to a low, and you never used to see this before. I'm talking about rational people. Yeah. It's the flip back and forth now, and my sense is it's just overall stress in life that's leading to it, that's manifesting itself in places where they used to be cool and understanding. It's the cool and understanding gets triggered much quicker than it ever used to. I don't know if you're seeing that, but it's something we've seen.
Definitely, and I think you're right. There's the changing climate of our world. And I don't mean like the actual climate. I mean like the economic landscape and how difficult it is for like levels of inflation and buying a home and like all of these other stressors, right, outside of life are difficult. I think it's also, how we all treat ourselves as far as like health, wellness, and all that kind of stuff, right? That's another big part of it. And I look at, your life is like this stool with 3 legs, and it's like your work life, your personal life, and then your friends and family. And so it's like making sure that all of those, if one leg is off, that's a really hard stool to keep up. And I think people are struggling with trying to manage all aspects of it at the same time.
And I would say also because of technology, those stools that you talked about have blurred. There's no real clean line. I don't know if you can remember, when you first adopted a smartphone and realized that, you could be found anywhere at any time, right? And so you're basically never off anymore. Your customers understand this too, right?
Yep.
And so, your type of business, you can never be closed, your business.
Yep.
Right? I'm talking about holidays and all that stuff. Somebody better be on, because as much as they say that, they'd love for you to take your time off on Thanksgiving, as long as it doesn't affect me, you can take your time off on Thanksgiving, right?
Yep.
And so, it's just, like I said, it's the world that we live in. And so the type of businesses that we have had to recalibrate around that.
Yeah. Yep. And so I think one of the bigger topics around marketing, right? And like when you're building out an entire like strategy for, we're rolling into 2025, right? You're advising your clients on, hey, these are the things that we should be considering. What are some of the main things that organizations should be considering to put into their business? And maybe we say we're talking about a services-based industry, right? Something that we both know well.
Sure.
What are some of the main things that organizations should be considering as part of their overall strategy?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say is, with most professional services, we're facing a sea of sameness out there. Almost everybody is saying the same thing. I can't tell you the number of times I've sat down in a meeting and someone will say, no, we're different. What's different about you? Services, my people. I say, okay. Yep. That's not different, right? And then you also hear about, X amount of budget, but the need to grow into Y and so forth. And so we talk a lot about, if you really do want to stand out and you do really want to grow, then you're going to have to be willing to do something different. You can't afford not to be ordinary in marketing, right? Because ordinary, it just gets passed over and looks like everyone else, right? Yep. So I think the first thing that we would start talking about is what makes you different, what makes you compelling, what makes you unique, how do we lean into that? Are you willing to stand out on an edge and say that so people can understand what's different about the Charles experience versus anything? I'm just using this as an example, right? And then from there, if you think that people are responding to advertising, and I'm talking about, again, paid advertising and so forth, you're wrong. It takes a lot of touches. And so if we were, when we are starting to talk to people, the idea here is, trying to set it up in such a way that the story that you're telling has the outreach, the channels, which is what you're doing here. You've built a channel, to create content around and position yourself in such a way in people's mind that they see you as thought leaders in said space, which I think is brilliant, which is why I'm supporting it. I think, this is, one of the key pieces that people misunderstand about even podcasting is they look at viewership of podcasting and think it can be a waste of time. If you think of podcasting more as the video asset that you've just created, the digital asset that you've just created, and your ability to cut it up into multiple pieces and share it across multiple channels, and or get people to take those same assets and share them out, very similar to probably how you've seen us do it with these events. You can create, dozens and dozens of advocates out there by staying staying in a lane that matters to them, and ask them to be a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that it's tricky. And when you think about the types of events that you see us producing, there's a reason why our brand is behind the scenes and not led with. Because if you thought about that experience of coming into those events, and the first thing that happens to you is you're being sold to,
yep,
or you felt like you're being sold to, it would change the experience completely.
Mm-hmm.
So all of that you've seen that us producing from the content that's outposted to the network that's sharing it to the events and so forth has been carefully curated,
Yep.
To tie into things that matter to us,
Mm-hmm.
and put us talking about something other than us, and let people connect the dots
Yep.
that this is the type of organization that they would like to be affiliated with, and so forth, if that makes sense to you.
100%. And it's like I said, it's an interesting topic because I absolutely love what you guys are doing with these events, and recently the ones that we've attended and
Mm-hmm.
got to see what kind of product you're putting out
Mm-hmm.
there, because it is truly relationship building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where a lot of organizations go wrong, because they spend time figuring out what tools do I need, what social platform do I use, how many like inbound marketing activities do I have. Like all of those different metrics are great, and there's a place for them within like an overall strategy. But when it comes down to it, it's the relationship building side, because exactly right. Like you don't want to walk in somewhere and be sold. But if I walked in, I was like, I had an awesome experience here. I learned something. I had great conversations. Where did all that happen? It was at the Rebellion Group. And then that's where you stay top of mind.
I mean, I think what you'll see a lot of people do is they think that, you hire a sales team, and they think that the first thing to do is most of them younger don't pick up the phone, but pick up the phone equivalent.
Yeah.
And outbound message someone and say, I'm ready to sell you something.
Mm-hmm.
In the role you have here, you must be being sold to too.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't even pay attention to that. It's just noise,
Yeah.
right? The stuff where they haven't even done their homework, let's just say another IT company, and you must get this too, messages you and say, hey, I'd like to sell you some cybersecurity solutions. And you're like, what is wrong with you?
Yeah. Yep.
Do you not even bother to look, and so it's amazing how many people are doing this still, though. It's amazing how many people are voicemailing saying, hey, I want to sell you something,
Yep.
And I've reversed that. I believe, you have to figure out, you have to figure, I call it going through the back door, not the front door. You have to figure out what it is that individual values. And then I believe it's important to act first, give first, not take. A lot of people try to take, extract first. What can I get from them?
Yeah.
I believe when you're building a relationship, and I'm talking about, this is marketing, sales, and business I'm talking about right now, because they're all connected.
Yep.
The way when it's done well is you're building a relationship, a friendship, that's valued. That what I'm focused on when you interact with my brands is when I message you, if you have seen value by way of the exchange with me or anyone in my company, you will respond.
Yep.
And versus if you think I'm trying to sell you something, you're going to duck me, right? And so everything has been set up in such a way, that I refer to it as our ecosystem. Everything is set up in such a way that once you're in the ecosystem, the Rebel ecosystem, all of the touch points now are set up to begin to nurture that relationship and draw. And if you think about some of our conversations over the last couple of weeks, you'll understand what I'm talking about. Draw deeper into what we're doing.
Yeah.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's interesting because it's such a non-traditional way to look at marketing, right? Like everything in marketing is like, how do I get my return on investment? And it's like, it's my click-through rate. It's, my, like, how much organic traffic's going to my website. And like, there's all these metrics and things that people look at, and everybody wants an instant return. But when it comes to marketing, the best thing you can do is focus on that relationship side. And for me, when I joined Charles IT, we had no marketing, we had no sales. We had one person on the sales team. His name was Joe, and he's become one of my best friends. But he, in my opinion, at the time, was not a great salesman, because I was like, he's not aggressive. He's not going out there and like, asking for all the referrals and doing all of these things. And I'm like, he's just giving things away all the time and helping people. And it took me a while to realize that, like, no, I'm the dumb one.
Yeah.
Like, that was brilliant. That was like, he was so relationship focused that, like, I still have people coming to us now because of the relationships and things that Joe did. So, like, it's
there's
perfect.
a line in there, right? I don't know how he did from a sales point of view, because you can see this happen too, because it's much easier to give in this manner. But at some point, you have to actually monetize that relationship, right?
Yeah.
And that's tricky now. You've moved from this resource that they value, but now you need to figure out how you move it to an opportunity, right?
Yep.
And if you try to move that too quickly, or you aren't sophisticated with how you're doing it, then you stay over kind of in the friend zone, is what you're describing.
Yeah.
He was over here in the friend zone, but now we really got to figure out how to monetize this, because it's great all you did, but what do we have to show for it, kind of thing. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, definitely.
So.
Yeah, and I think that's where I've spent some time, like, trying to curate some of these relationships. And I think one of the best places that I think a lot of organizations don't spend enough time on, and you mentioned this earlier, was, we have some partnerships where they even have contracts in place and all these other things, is these networking groups. And, we've tried to start, like, our own kind of networking group, our own little, like, BNI type environment where it's truly focused on, like, relationship-based selling, where we can rely on each other to help monetize and make those relationships turn into real opportunities. And so, what's your experience with that type of, networking side and actually doing the conversion from relationship?
It's extremely rare to meet an individual who has an actual network, I would say.
Yeah.
They have one or two relationships, everybody. And once they've tapped those, that's pretty much it. You will meet people in your life who are incredibly connected. There's a gentleman who used to work at the former business here who was at our meeting the other day, who was incredibly connected. So when you try to put those types of groups together, most of the people, once you get through meeting one and meeting two and they've shot their game, you'll see that they're just dropping names. That's the problem with those BNIs. They just, oh shit, they looking, here, call this guy.
Yep.
Call this guy or what, right? Do you know him? Well, yes, sort of. And you try calling them, they're not going to call you back, and there's nothing there, right? So I believe the idea with those types of things is to reverse it. I believe you have to focus on the quality of the content, the number of people that are in the room that people consider of value and voice, and you'll see the others line up to be a part of it. And so when you see these types of events that I'm producing, you will see us load up the talent, because the talent drives the audience. And you can't do this, you can't put on something like we're talking about and make it look like an advertisement for yourself. Even though your customers may love you, I can guarantee you, if you were to try to do one of these things and it's going to be you at the center of it for your customers, and you go to actually do it, majority of them are not going to show up. It's just not going to. I'm just telling you right now.
Yeah.
Now, if you were to take that and reverse it and go get your customer that's the CEO of XYZ hospital, and the person over there, it's over there, and this person this where, and then you stand back and let them talk.
Yeah.
And people then can see. The idea is to leverage their name, their individual name, and the brand and their title. That's what you're looking for, right? So that people see that and say, I got to be there, right? Because those folks are talking. People cannot, when we talk to our customers about this, no, I want to be the one talking. No, that's not the point. The point is to be seen around these folks, right?
It's the center of influence.
Yeah, exactly what it is.
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we've talked about this, and I think you understand that what I'm talking about. This is a different way to do this. And when you asked, how do you go to market, is what you were just asking me earlier. You're going to have to commit to doing it differently if you intend to grow. If you're going to break through, or you better have a lot of money, like those billboards. and you can break through that way, right? You can get brand recognition, maybe not the right brand recognition, but you can get brand recognition. You asked me, how do I get strategic? How do I laser focus my efforts? I'm talking about how to do that, so that every action has a reaction that's a byproduct of that you can benefit from. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, yeah. It's funny because the original thought of like, hey, let's talk about the marketing strategy and come on here and talk about social media, talk about inbound marketing, talk about all these different pieces. Your outlook on that is not focused there, right? It's very strategic on the relationships that you build, the networking opportunities that you can create, and then use those to be able to create the collateral, create the content, and do the things that are the part of your strategy. But you're really focused on the relationship side of marketing.
Yeah, I mean, go back to the word ecosystem. You have to get people in. When I say ecosystem, your ecosystem extends from your email list to the individual relationships, to your LinkedIn handle, to your Facebook, to your website, and so forth. Right? All of that is your ecosystem. And when you think about content like you're producing today, if you were to take content like this and hit against that, like look at that like syndication, you've now told the story that you want to tell to the audience that you're interested in having it resonate with. And it's really, really efficient strokes. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Compared to the article I sent you this morning, right? I doubt anything will come from that publication, as much as I appreciate it, because it doesn't matter. Because I'm going to take that content, I'm going to cut it up, and I'm going to put it out into the audience that I want to see it.
Yep.
And now I've controlled the narrative and the messaging and so forth.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that's great. I'm thinking about the article and specifically like, the adoption of AI and all of that, and how you're starting to leverage that. And so, what are some examples of, the different AI things that you're starting to leverage in your organization?
So I think what I would have been focused on for a while is when you think about all the campaigns we run for people, so I get to see data across hundreds of companies and the relative lack of response for most of these, right? And it's getting, as I said to you earlier, it's getting more expensive and it's dwindling. The response is dwindling. Question, you have to start asking yourself is why, right? So let's just take paid search as an example. If a very effective paid search campaign, if you get a 2% response rate, they say that's strong, right? If you reverse that and ask yourself, what happened to the other 98%, right? So you're telling me I have to waste 98% of my energy in order to have 2%. That sounds kind of crazy, but that's what the world that we live in today, that's how it's done. So park that for a second. About a year ago, I was introduced to a gentleman who is a Harvard, Yale doctorate, and he's been studying, this field of, it's called precognitive neurolinguistics, right? A lot of words, smarter than me, but what he's been studying is the science of the sort of the words between the words and what those mean, right? And so I thought this was really interesting, right? And so what we've decided, what we've spun up, and I'm going to tell one more backstory just so you get it. The other piece that's relevant to understand when I go back to that 2% versus 98%. If you think about the story people tell about themselves on social media, almost all of it is a lie. Right? People fabricate, they tell the version that they want the world to
get the clicks.
And so you can't rely on that, but at the same time, the data that is being pulled from those profiles is what we're using when we use targeting. So they've lied about it, we've scooped it, we're using it to target, right? Same thing with any of the polls and intercepts or any of that kind of stuff. People are basically answering in most cases the way they perceive you want them to answer. So all of this data now that we've been using for targeting purposes is basically incorrect. Let me say that one more way. If you think about the very, very first paid search campaign that went out there, and let's just say it went to 500 people, and let's say it was about that watch that's on your wrist, but you chose not to click on it, right? Guess what happens next? You're excluded from the next campaign forever and ever, and now your audience just shrunk by the people that clicked on it.
Yep.
and so on and so forth. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So what's been happening is audience size has been shrinking because we keep targeting, and we're targeting the wrong people.
Yep.
What we've decided to do with this tool that we built was to ingest all this content, all the reviews and so forth that are out there, and put it into this tool, overlay his algorithms of how to interpret the data of what people are saying,
Yep.
right? Ingest first-party data of audience, like think your customer list and what they said and what they bought and so forth, overlay all this data together and run it through these programs and say, identify audiences in here and the clusters they fit into. And once we've done that, which are the ones we've been talking to, right? So in your case, it might be we've been concentrating here and here, but did you know that these other segments exist and we've been ignoring them? Yeah. Now that we've identified that they exist, how should we be talking to them, right? Mm-hmm. What resonates with them? What are the words? What are the visuals and so forth? So with the power of AI is the ability to take something that in the past that would have been very difficult to generate down into audiences, but down to the individual. Yeah. So what we're trying to do is use AI and these technologies that I've described to power campaigns to hyper focus on the targeting, so that if you're going to put X energy in, the output is much higher because it's speaking the language of the individual that resonates, the visuals and so forth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so that's the tool that we were talking about.
Yeah, that's great, and I love that you're actually looking at and targeting the people that want to see the things that you're putting in front of them, rather than you're excluding a lot of those people out because of the activities and what is represented. Mm-hmm. So very cool. I love that side from the technology into the marketing. Mm-hmm. So as we wrap up here, I think there's two things. First and foremost, again, thank you for coming on and just spending the time to connect with me. It's been a really good conversation.
Yeah, thank you.
And would love to kind of hear your final thoughts as far as, like, again, back to the topic at hand of I'm looking to implement a marketing strategy. What's the right thing? Where should I start? Right, if you have a concluding thought on that.
I would identify where you have had the most historical success. I would begin to exclude those pieces that aren't working but have been part of the overall arsenal. I would be willing to do it differently. I'd be willing to be a bit almost provocative, take a stance so that it resonates in the marketplace. I would be hyper-targeted on the people that it's sent to. And I would make sure that the people that are most receptive to my message are the ones that I'm spending the most energy on nurturing it for the referral sources. That doesn't mean that you're not doing some paid this and some SEO that and so forth and so on. These things are just supporting tools to what I'm talking about, right? You need that to be able, like the link I sent you, to be able to point you to something.
Yep.
So you have to have that. Those are in support of the actual actions, though.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, again, I'm not sure if I ask this question to a bunch of other people who are in your space are going to give me that answer. And I love the fact that is the non-traditional way to look at it. It was like, do things that matter, right? Like, don't focus on, well, I need to do an email campaign, even though I'm only getting a 2% actual click rate on that. And so I love that thought process.
Yeah, and you said it earlier about attribution. Attribution is becoming a really interesting point here because of the changes with a lot of digital laws and privacy and so forth. It is becoming increasingly difficult to point to attribution. I can't tell you the number of times you go into a company, especially entrepreneurs, and they're like, look, money's no issue. I'll give you if I give you $100 and you can turn that into $200, we'll do that all day long. Like, oh, really?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Of course. But the problem is, if you just think about campaigns and how things are being blocked these days and so forth, I may have seen it on Facebook, but it took 5, 6, 8, 10 days later before I actually came over here and did something, and that transaction is now lost. And so I can't actually prove that it happened. I know it's the only place your story is being told, but there is no digital trail anymore for us to look at that. Does that make sense to you? So when the focus has been so heavily on attribution lately, this is starting to change.
Yep.
And so when you think about what I've been talking about, I have been talking about cultivating and grooming and curating, a version of a house list where you spend all of your energy on, is what I'm talking about.
Yeah, for
Makes
sure.
sense?
Yeah, that's great.
Thank you.
So last part of our show here is something that we do every single time. It's a surprise to you, and that's my goal. But basically what we do is we do a typing test at the end of the show. And so we're going to test your skills, see where you land, and then for everybody else that is looking for the scores, they stay tuned for the next episode,
Gotcha.
and that's when we'll release and
Okay.
let you know where you rank against everybody else that's been on the show.
I'm old enough that I started learning how to type on typewriters.
Oh, so this is going to be a
But
breeze.
I can't type anymore. So now I peck and click. I don't know if I can see this. I don't have my glasses, man. Enough people have received. People know when I write in a very short cadence, so they know that this is about all I can muster. So I just hit start test.
Yeah.
Oh man, I'm gonna fail. I'm not happy. I don't like this at all.
This is great.
So I just write that? All right.
Yeah.
When we hear
I want to know if he's going to beat Foster.
out.
Not.
See, I can't even see the keyboard. This is not fair. Criminals. I can't see the keyboard. I'm sorry.
You're fine.
Oh man, I think I failed terribly. I literally, this is not. What did I get? That's terrible. I can't even see the keys. I'm so sorry. I feel like an idiot. I can't see the keys though.
We're gonna have to exclude this one from the.
I feel like that test is not fair. I'm gonna just go ahead and say.